Welcome, everybody. Excited to have you here. We're covering 10 Parables, Chapter 8, which is Brakhill's Greatest Citizen. Adrian's going to be teaching tonight for us, and I'll turn it over to him.
Hi, everybody. Oh, wow, we're going to have to mute. There we go, and I'll unmute this. Secret tip, Cameron and I are in the same room. In fact, a bunch of people are here. So we have to play games with speakers. Thank you, Cameron. And I didn't want this to come across as don't comment. More, it was just there's a lot of material here, and we're trying to get it done in less than 4 hours. So, so here we go. Brakhill's Greatest Citizen. Go ahead and grab your parable, and let's start out. The town of Brakhill. Okay, we have to stop there. Brakhill is an interesting name for a town. If you take the three-letter Hebrew root that we would translate as BRK, then it means blessed. So it's a blessed hill. But if we translate it as BRQ, which is a different letter in Hebrew that also makes the K sound. So you either have a kaf or a kuf. And if you go with the BRQ, then it's lightning. So you have Lightning Hill. What does that perhaps remind you of? What kind of a hill would be a blessed hill or a hill with lightning? The mountain of God. Yeah, the mountain of the Lord's house. Although brackish, what does that bring to mind? What's brackish? Salty. Yeah. Yeah, the most brackish place in the continental U.S. is, of course, Salt Lake. So you got some layers of meaning there in Brakhill. Take from that what you will. But it says it's located in the high plains of northwestern Wyoming. And somebody pointed out rather astutely, I thought, that this is one of two locations called out in the parables. The other one is the Sawtooth Mountains. And so I started looking into the location and found out that there are no high plains in northwestern Wyoming. What is northwestern Wyoming? Mountains.
Yellowstone.
It's Yellowstone. Yeah. The entire northwestern corner of Wyoming is Yellowstone. Well, and so that's the other thing. To actually be classified as high plains, that is actually a geologic term, and the high plains end at eastern Wyoming, by definition. Be that as it may, somebody rode their Harley through Wyoming because just on the other side, after you leave Wyoming, you hit a town called Sturgis. And so somebody's crossed this area quite a bit heading back and forth to Sturgis and seen the rolling hills and the hot springs, columns of steam, buckskin grasses, all of that. So this is a setting, and this is a setting that would be very familiar to Denver. But I thought it was interesting that you can't point to it on a map because it doesn't quite work. That's okay. The columns of steam reminds us of Yellowstone. The hot springs, pillars of smoke. What does that bring up for people?
Shekinah.
The Shekinah, yeah, the presence of God. The pillar of smoke by day, the pillar of fire by night. So this is again pointing to what?
Presence of God. The
presence of God. The early settlers believed God's hand watched over this particular promised land with a capital P and a capital L. How do you get a promised land?
Covenant.
By covenant. The only way you get a promised land is by covenant, especially, with capital letters. So the only way that you have a right to be here is by covenant. Therefore, in the first three sentences, we've established some things about the symbolism of the hill, some things about the symbolism of the area, and that this is designed to evoke holiness. This is supposed to be holy. This is a promised land. Okay, native grasses grow green in the spring and settle into a tan buckskin color for the rest of the year. Why put that in? Anybody got any thoughts? Anybody out there in TV land? I honestly don't know, so there's no right or wrong answer. I've pondered that a fair bit, and I haven't come up with much other than it gives the setting.
It's dry. I mean, if it were to remain green, would likely have a fair amount of rainfall.
So you've got a root out of dry ground, more or less. You've got evoking a desert place, a dry place, but there's life there. Antelope and deer. When's the last time we saw deer in the parable?
The last parable.
Yeah, the one just before this one, where that
Hope
kind
and
of
tar water.
kind of played an important part, important symbolism.
Yep.
And in the weathered tree. So there's this ongoing notion of life and life being supported in these parables. And so they ran wild around Brakhill, which was a precious food source. What's significant about that? Any thoughts?
Well, that harkens back to tar water. You know, the animals were a food source for the early settlers, and then it said that they returned to be part of the beauty, which echoes hope.
Right. Yeah. So no longer needing to eat the animals. Almost kind of a millennial sort of a setting here. Designed to be anyway. Initially a food source, now part of the beauty. And everyone knew that this holy place that we've just talked about was the home of one Olive E. Canfield, the famous children's author, of course. Before we talk more about her, let's talk about that name. What do you get from the name, Olive E. Canfield? Okay, referencing an olive tree. Good. So you have a whole vineyard parable idea popping into your head.
High plains and then field. About the,
okay, so there's a connection between her and this place. The grasses evokes a field, and this.
Joey.
Okay, and then, wow, what's all over my book? What about that VIE ending? Life, yeah. Vida, V in French. What is it in Spanish? Vida, yeah, okay. And so the living olive tree, this evokes life, this evokes bringing forth of fruit. And then Canfield, here's something interesting that I hadn't picked up. I'm going to share my screen here and see if this makes any sense. Okay, hopefully if this is working, then you're seeing a slide, Brakhill's Greatest Citizen. Is that working? Okay, we kind of talked about the setting. We got to get past that. We got to get past that. And, oh, okay, olive. Yeah, so olive, we have Zenos's allegory, the house of Israel, the family of God, good fruit that's worth preserving. All of that is evoked by olive. We talked about V, life. Olive trees live for hundreds or thousands of years. You plant olive trees for your grandchildren. That's who harvests them. And so that all of this evokes something designed to endure. And then Canfield. You ever heard of Dorothea Canfield, who's then became Dorothea Fisher? She invented the Montessori method of education for children. She was a big women's rights activist in her day, did a lot of war relief work, and was a big proponent of lifelong education. Regularly voted one of the 10 most influential women in the United States, and she was a prolific writer of children's books. She spoke 5 languages fluently, and the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Children's Book Award is the award for new authors of children's books, and the winner is chosen by the vote of child readers every year. So if you're going to pick a name for an author of beloved children's books, Canfield's not a bad way to go. Now, I don't know if that's what Denver had in mind, but I find it a little more than coincidental that there's such a tie-in with that name. So, okay. So with that in mind, let's read about Olive E. Canfield. She died impoverished. What does that imply?
She was not successful in her time. She was not well known.
Not well known, not successful.
Poor.
So her wealth didn't consist of anything worldly. Yeah. Exactly. Her wealth was wisdom, and it was something else. But this was her setting. This holy place is the ground from which she came. She died impoverished, but left a legacy that grew over time. What grows?
Knowledge.
Okay,
Trees.
trees. One of the definitions of life is growth. She left a living legacy. Her legacy continued to grow. Unlike, we'll find out, our friend Ira. Her fame came only after her death. She taught school until she retired and was a grandmother before writing her first book. Okay, teaching school, what does this imply?
She was a teacher. She had wisdom and knowledge that she could share.
Her life was devoted then to imparting what she knew, to educating, to sharing with others. And we find out that it was sharing with children, educating children in the 1st through 6th grades. Huh. Yeah. Who designed
Back to basics.
the 7-level program by which we are supposed to progress and become something?
Mother in heaven.
Mother in heaven, who then devotes her life to teaching children, to imparting her wisdom, who leaves a living legacy, who is the tree of life, who bears fruit worthy to be stored up against the season. I'm starting to think we have a very strong tie-in with the Heavenly Mother figure.
And levels 1 through 6, if you think of Jacob's ladder.
Right. He didn't have to put that in, and yet she's helping the children progress up the levels. So she taught school. She was a grandmother, thus she had posterity. We don't read about her husband here. We don't read about her children, but she was a grandmother, therefore she had children. But we don't mention that. Odd. Okay. Now what? Oh, go ahead.
Ask if anyone has
Oh yeah, I
comments
should.
up to this point.
I should stop. I'm talking to the people in the room. We'll open it up for thoughts and comments right here before we go ahead. Who has something to share?
Jacqueline Olson commented in the chat box, native grasses could imply generations of people.
Oh, interesting.
Hmm.
Others that were planted in that spot and have grown. Good. Okay, anyone else?
I thought it was interesting that she wrote and illustrated her books. That's unusual.
Okay,
Illustrated, yeah.
Yeah, it's unusual for the writer to also be the illustrator.
But she
Interesting.
painted it on canvas and
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah, so
Which is
she,
more.
that implies some things too. That's a great point. So art and English, both art and English are methods of creating,
Communicating.
communicating,
Expressing.
expression.
And
And so
last.
this is what she specialized in. Right, and they all can last.
Oil paints specifically last the longest.
It's unusual. It's unusual though because an illustrator has to portray in art, in drawing, painting, whatever, what the author intends to say or intended to say. So to have this individual, this Ollie be able to illustrate her, she was able to illustrate exactly what she was thinking,
Mm-hmm.
She was saying it and then
showing it as well. So
demonstrating it.
she's teaching in a way that, people learn by different methods.
Yeah.
Whether it's hands-on, whether it's by, listening or by taking notes or whatever. She was appealing to all.
So she's teaching her children, if we can call them her children, by her words and by showing them. Interesting. Good point. Thank you.
So she could reach those who learn visually and those who learn more audibly
Mm-hmm.
and tactilely.
Like an endowment where you can teach more through
Exactly. Like an endowment.
Experience.
Yeah.
You can pack a lot into it.
Or even like a parable. Parables are like ogres, and ogres are like onions, and there's a lot of layers.
Well, and the oils even, the fact that he mentions oil on canvas.
Right.
What are the oils used for? I mean, there's all kinds of anointing and all kinds of things.
That's a whole paragraph from now, though.
Well, it was like the
Hang
next
on, hang on.
Okay.
I'm just curious, is the audio picking up all the comments in the room? Just want to make sure people can actually hear.
Someone's shaking their head no.
No, you're not
Yeah.
hearing.
Yeah, I can hear all of them. At least I can.
When you turn around the microphone, it makes a big difference.
Well, we can put the microphone. Should we just put it up there?
No.
No one needs to see me.
I think people
We'll
want to
just
see.
Or just reiterate what when they have comments or questions, just reiterate it real quick.
Okay. We'll do that too. Speak up and we'll reiterate.
I've been worried.
So art and English, 1st through 6th grades, and it was a natural development for her, to turn to writing once she had the time to do so. Once she reached a point in her existence where she could teach others in that way. Now, what gets written? What gets preserved in writing that is worth preserving?
Strengths or weaknesses becoming strengths.
How
What
about
she writes about?
Wisdom.
scripture? Yeah. So ultimately, when she develops to the point that now she can produce these sacred writings that will endure and that will grow, she does so. So she spent a lifetime teaching and loving children. Yes, she did. So it was also natural for her to write and illustrate children's books to provide scriptures for her offspring, if we're using the Heavenly Mother motif. Her illustrations were works of art. She patiently painted them with oil on canvas and then used photographs for the prints. So you brought up the point, Sherry Ann brought up the point about oil, and oil being essential in certain ordinances and symbolic as well. And then what does it say that, and oil endures, oil painting is going to last longer than anything. What does it say about the fact that for her children's book, she took the time to do that? She cared. Yeah. Was this a rushed project?
No.
Crank it out in 6 months and make a little dough?
Well, and yeah, oils, you have to, it takes like a week for oil paint to dry.
Yeah.
So any layers she wants to do on it has to be done over time.
And then it takes, so a lot of time to produce it, a lot of time for it to cure and be ready. This was obviously a labor of love. There's no physical reason in the world that you would need to do this, but as Annette pointed out, there's no reason that you would need to illustrate your own books. And yet she did. So then she took photographs for the prints in the books. Her series on Wendy Wilson. All right, so now that we've talked about this educator, all of you, we've got to talk a little bit about Wendy Wilson. And let's just run through, before we start talking about meaning, let's just read through this, okay? So local favorites for years, became popular on a regional basis when she was in her 80s, but it was after her death.
Yeah, that's a typo.
After her death, however, that Wendy Wilson became known nationally and internationally. Jumping ahead to more about Wendy's, skip a paragraph. All of these, Wendy Wilson was introduced in Windy Wendy. Okay, so we have an awkward child with a peculiar appearance.
Wait, just 1 second.
Yeah.
I know how Denver has talked about how he loves Monet and the impressionistic oil on canvas art, and then the pictures that are taken of his work now and made as prints. I just wonder if that inspired him at all in this. That just came to mind because
That's a good
heard
point,
him talk
yeah.
about how he loves Monet.
And hates, who was it?
Van Gogh.
Van Gogh's Impressionism. Yeah,
Yeah.
he said if the suicide stopped the outpouring of that, then maybe we're the better for it.
Yeah.
Good point. Okay, so Wendy Wilson is a story of an awkward child with a peculiar appearance. There was a horse with a peculiar appearance that also seemed awkward in one of the parables. Um,
And a tree.
self-conscious, like she would do in all, made her self-conscious, okay, like she would do in all her books. So this awkward child, there is no beauty that anyone should desire this awkward child. All of you used Wendy to show children how things they think are their weaknesses may prove to be their strengths. Well, we're quoting scripture at this point. Men coming to me, I will show unto them their weakness. I give them in weakness that they may be humble, and then I will make weak things become strong unto them, right? Wendy thought herself too skinny, too tall, too freckled, and too shy to ever amount to anything in this world. Anybody else that was tall and awkward and came from Galilee and talked funny, that was a creation of Heavenly Mother? Well, of course. Wendy had long hair, and it was all wrong and curly and unruly and could not be managed, much like Christ was considered unruly and unmanageable and had symbolic long hair. It looked like an explosion, wrote Olive, but to her surprise, on a particularly windy day, she was lifted by her hair like a great sail and found she could fly about like the seeds of a dandelion carried by the wind. What's the Latin word for wind?
And
Pneumos, spirit. Yeah, breath, pneumos, spirit.
Well, that's Hebrew.
Yeah, ruach, if you do it in Hebrew. So carried about by the Spirit, carried by the wind. Wendy's body was just right, her hair just perfect to allow her to be the only girl who could fly, who could mount up, who could ascend. And she would grow her unruly hair even longer, could jump off buildings even on a calm day and float to the ground. Well, wasn't that one of the things that Lucifer told Christ to do? Yeah. And angels are going to bear you up, right? Which he very well could have. He didn't. It was a reassuring tale of triumph by what was once just an awkward little girl. All children could relate in one way or another to the awkwardness of their own youth. In Wendy's, they had a model for hopeful triumph over life's limitations. So in my mind, in my view, Wendy is a Christ figure to the Heavenly Mother figure that we have, the creation of Olive Canfield. Thoughts? Okay, we skipped a little bit. We need to go back. Her series on Wendy Wilson were local favorites for years, but popular on a regional basis when Olive was in her 80s. So let's talk about Mary, the Mother of Christ. Yeah, go ahead. Speak loudly.
This sentence, all children could relate in one way or another to the awkwardness of their own youth. Yes, in a way, children do, but not until they're mature enough to have some guile, to have some realization. This is not little children. This is like us. We are
right.
children.
And for those that can't hear, Phil is talking about how this doesn't refer really to little kids. This refers to people like us as children, which is what we're supposed to be. Okay, and let's pause. This is a great opportunity. Other insights and comments? Who'd like to share? Nobody?
This is Jacqueline Olson.
Jacqueline? Hi.
Hi. You know, one of the things that I found fascinating about the hair is hair has traditionally, through symbolism, been the glory of a person. And so if you take all the descriptive words about her hair, giving us an insight to the glory of this personage, I think it's quite descriptive.
Great point. Yeah. Yeah. Good.
It also talks about the hair and flying about like seeds of a dandelion. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you could talk about that flies around, but it's the seeds of a dandelion that.
Oh. Yeah, but his microphone's not on.
It's fine. The seeds, again, representing something that could grow into something greater, something bigger.
And the seeds get planted elsewhere. Yeah. Spread around the world. Good point. Like the weathered tree. Yeah. Good.
With the hair, it made me think of the parable, the 5 men sent from God, who each grew their hair. And that hair, in some instances, gave them protection and power that they wouldn't have had it been short. And Christ was one of those 5 men sent from God. And so I think it is a description of him in this parable, but we could liken it to the other 5 as well.
Might be a good place to stop and point out that in this parable so far, I think we see every single other parable in some capacity.
So if you didn't hear, Cameron said, thus far we've seen a representation of every single other parable thus far, it seems like. Good. Anyone else before we pick it up again? Well, the point I wanted to make, for those who have the physical book, at the bottom of 68, it says her series on Wendy Wilson were local favorites for years, popular on a regional basis when Olivia was an old woman in her 80s, but it was after her death that Wendy became known nationally and internationally. How much does that track with the life of Christ and the scriptures about Christ? During his lifetime, he managed to attract, at his height of popularity, maybe 7,000 people. At his death, a few hundred that remained faithful, perhaps. But after he died, during the lifetime still of his mother, during her mortality here, his fame started to grow. It started to spread and eventually became known nationally and internationally. So Wendy, again, seems to be a Christ figure.
Adrian, I have a question. When did you first see Olivia Canfield as Mother in Heaven and Wendy Wilson as a Christ figure? When did that first? Last night. It's thank you. It's a beautiful. Anyway.
Sure.
It's funny, McKay, he's taught this parable before. It was probably a year and a half ago, and taught it in a completely different way. And last night he told me, he said, I see things completely different now with the new knowledge that I have, and the parable is completely different, and I'm not going to teach it like I used to teach it.
Well, parables are like ogres.
Yeah, Adrian shared his PowerPoint presentation with me, and the overlap between the way he saw it and the way I did was like 95%, but there's a lot more light here, brother.
Well, there's a ton here. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if we're making an illusion that this is a Christ figure or the consort of Christ, to set the stage, I think if that's the direction that you're heading, I find it fascinating to look at the history of Mary Magdalene and where there's no history of her bones ever being laid to rest, and the fact that she really was blown about into several different locations that have records of her visiting after Christ was gone, but then her going very similar, the same direction or the same way that Moses or the 3 Nephites or Moroni, that they, where they go, no man knoweth. And I think that ties a lot into where it said that she was blown about or carried away by the wind, and that it allowed her to become the only girl that could fly, or be likened unto the wind that cometh and goeth that no man know.
Yeah, great point. Okay, anything else? Anyone else have a comment? Well, so we had another paragraph we skipped before, and that was fame for those who provide insights always increases over time. Ideas last forever. They're the only really permanent thing in the world. Even continents drift, but a well-taught idea will cross time, culture, language, and generations. And if you look at the very last paragraph in this parable, which is like many pages ahead, we read the same thing. Love and wisdom outlast stone itself, kind of is the conclusion. And so talking about how continents even change. I mean, what bigger stones are there than continents? And yet a well-taught idea outlasts that.
It's interesting. In the last parable, there was a little drop in the story of Lance, how he's running through the forest and pulls out the arrow to shoot the bear. And it's God that taught Nimrod about the arrow. And that idea transcends all civilization now. It's the idea that persists perpetually, and it was taught by God.
Yeah. So ideas that are taught by God, and hopefully you could hear Cameron, but he mentioned Nimrod and the arrow, and the design of an arrow being taught by God has persisted across all times and all cultures. The ideas that come from God, in other words, truth, because that's all that comes from God. Truth endureth forever. So that's, I think, one of the takeaways from this parable. And in Denver's take, these are both female characters rather than male characters. He could have written about a man, I suppose, and a boy character, but he chose feminine characteristics and the feminine side of sharing wisdom that lasts forever and providing a way for children to be raised up, nurtured, taught, and to grow, 1st through 6th grade.
There's Christ also that repeatedly refers to his gathering us as a hen gathereth the chicks.
Yeah. Yeah, and so let's pause here. Take note, when you look in the scriptures about Christ's interactions with his mother, we have every interaction that's recorded, him, of course, doing her will, doing what she says. But the first interaction that we have recorded, other than him in his infancy, is at the temple, 12 years old. He's there. He knows more than anybody in the room. They've already left. They come back. Your father and I have sought thee sorrowing. And he says, know ye not that I should be about my father's business? Who taught our Lord to be about his father's business?
She did.
His mother. And she says, yes, but not yet. You're 18 years, you're going to wait. And when it is time for him to be about his father's business and begin his ministry, who tells him it's time?
His mother.
His mother. And tells him to
Make
the wine, yeah, at the wedding. And so my point is that in every interaction we have him showing deference to his mother, but she was the one who taught him his father's will. Now, Christ's calling card, when he appears to the Nephites at Bountiful, he comes down from heaven. Behold, I am Jesus Christ, whom the prophets testified shall come into the world. And behold, I am the light and the life of the world, and I have suffered the will of the Father, or I have taken upon me the sins of the world, and I have suffered the will of the Father in all things from the beginning. That's his identity. I'm the guy who did the Father's will in all things from the beginning. He could not have done that without his mother. Every bit of that came through her. From his birth to the cross, she was there because her mission was to prepare the sacrificial lamb for the sacrifice, which she did, and she did it perfectly. Thus, he was raised to do his father's will, and he knew it because his mother taught him. So when we read about the stripling warriors and, oh, we do not doubt our mothers knew it, that's a wonderful Sunday school lesson or sacrament talk on Mother's Day, but there is so much more depth there about the role of women in raising up fruit that is able to be preserved against the season. Mary came here and showed us how it's done. So that's a point we can take from this, I think. Okay, comments? All right, well, we'll just keep going then. We covered a bunch about Wendy and awkward little girls that are awkward children, awkward in their youth, that then grow up and triumph and overcome life's limitations and overcome weakness like the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly is a representation of Christ, like the dung beetle that's literally born in shit and grows up to navigate by the Milky Way itself, to use the stars for navigation. All of these things are types of Christ. And so, oh, go ahead.
So the first daughter of the father and the mother is Eve, right? And I just thought it was interesting in the next paragraph, at the end of that paragraph, it says, her referring to Olivier Canfield, other stories were popular, but it was Wendy who was her most loved character. And I just like the idea of her being Eve as well.
Great take. Yeah. And layers, absolutely. Okay, so all of you took. Oh, sure. I'm just closest to the microphone. You read.
Well, someone out there should read.
Oh, okay. All right, somebody want to read the next paragraph?
With a break, I can't pass that up then. So most loved character, my beloved son. Yeah. I mean, jumping off the page now.
Yeah. All right. Who will read the next paragraph?
Where are you?
All of you
I'll read.
Took Wendy into adventures.
Top of 70.
Top of page 70.
Oh, top of page 70. Okay. Adventures. All of you took Wendy into adventures, crime solving in Private Eye Wendy, then into Foreign Land, into Wendy and the Tornado. A dozen books, all illustrated by her, became treasured tales that children all across the country knew and loved. The artwork was as light and whimsical as the stories themselves. Her other stories were popular, but it was Wendy who was her most loved character.
So a dozen books, a dozen testaments, all treasured tales, all illustrated by her. When you read the testimony of John, he includes information he could have only gotten from Christ's mother. There's no other way he could have known it, like what she was thinking, for example, or what happened when the angel came and visited her and what she said, or her greeting to Elizabeth. So these things, all enlightened by her, illustrated by her, became treasured tales everybody knew and loved, although we only have 4 quote-unquote gospels that are canonized. There's no doubt that all of the 12 wrote a testimony.
Well, we have the Into a Foreign Land. We have the Book of Mormon, which is a different land.
Sure, and even, as soon as the gifts came, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, very next thing is you got to flee to Egypt. And that's where Jesus was raised, in a foreign land, until the next point we have of him appearing in Scripture. He's 12 years old, and he's in the temple. So somewhere between him being 2 years old and 12 years old, he was raised primarily in Egypt.
So, Adrian, I think that Nephi's testimony of the Book of the Lamb of God being restored seems to indicate that those other witnesses from the apostles will be restored.
That's a great point, Gary, and hopefully those other dozen books will come back. Yeah. Okay, any other?
I just wonder what the meanings of these books are. Into Adventures, Crime Solving, and Private Eye Wendy. Where did that come from? Wendy and the Tornado. I have to think of the Wizard of Oz or something.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I think maybe the allusion to the foreign land could give us a clue that Wendy and the Tornado might very well be Christ coming after the destruction in the foreign land. So it would tie to the Book of Mormon.
Great point. Private Eye. crime solving, I don't have much I can do with, but private eye is interesting because there were private visions, private things seen, like on the Mount of Transfiguration, where only Peter, James, and John were there to witness what took place. And that word eye, you're going to have to watch for that throughout this parable because it has to do with seership. An eye, when spoken of in Scripture, it's also the Hebrew letter ayin, but it means a seer stone. Let's just go with that. So there's multiple meanings even of eye, but we'll get to those a little bit later when things start to catch David's eye. Okay, let's see. All of these works. Who wants to read that paragraph for us? Lessons to children. Go ahead.
Nice and loud.
Nice and loud. And I'm going to point the microphone at you. So read good.
All of these works taught lessons to children. They were popular and endured because they contained the wisdom and truths gathered by a grandmother over her lifetime. The problem children she had encountered and the care and love which brought them to change became the inspiration for all of these characters and stories. Adults found themselves reflecting on all of these teachings long after they stopped reading her books to their children who grew up. There were even adults with no children who bought copies to read and enjoy.
Okay, thank you. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, so what sticks out to you there? Who sees something in that paragraph? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
So,
go ahead, Rob.
Me first. Yeah, don't shut your mouth, Edwin. No, I'm sorry, Edwin. I'm just joking. So there's in our cultures, both Polynesian and Native American, the stories are told about the stars, and I noticed in this last Nature's podcast where Denver said, how about how the stories are told of Christ in the stars, and we'll save that for another time. And then he moves on casually, and I'm noticing that there are 12 constellations. So in the paragraph prior to this one, when they talked about 12 stories, that reminded me of the stories for those types of zodiacal constellations that we have in our cultures. But then even more so, the way that he describes this last paragraph is the way that all of the stories are being told in our cultures. They constantly get told from generation to generation. And it's not just a story that they tell to young children as though to condescend and to bring these valuable stories to young children. They were stories that actually were valuable to them, and they actually lived according to them. Like the story of Maui, is not it wasn't a story about just an ancestor. It was a story about somebody who was going to pull the islands out of the sea, or to actually do the things of a demigod that a demigod would do. And so I see a lot of parallels when it comes to cultural significance.
Great. Very good. Edwin.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple things. Private eye being the singular eye, right? And like you said with seership, kind of like what you said. The other thing is, okay. So I really like the idea, and I've gained more like for the idea that Wendy is Eve. So Orson Pratt talked about how Joseph, in one of Joseph's revelations, there's a parable about a man that has, I believe, a vineyard, and he has 12 servants, and he goes and visits each servant for an hour in the day. And Orson Pratt gives the interpretation that he says he got from Joseph Smith, that those 12 were the different creations of God, and that God would, Jesus meaning, would go from creation to creation at each time. Okay, so if God is also father and mother, this idea is that there's 12 of these creations that she has taken part in creating. But it's Wendy, Eve, her children, which are most popular, and Wendy being like the dandelion that gives seed abundantly, that goes everywhere. There's that, and then there was one last thing that I wanted to bring up. No, that was it. Okay, good.
Cool. Thank you. That's a great point, Edwin.
McKay wanted to come on.
Go ahead, McKay.
The literature from Heavenly Mother is called wisdom literature.
Right.
Gord gave me a copy of Pistis Sophia a few Christmases ago, and that's Greek for wisdom. So this is called wisdom here. Her literature it contained wisdom.
Wisdom and truths, yeah.
So
Beautiful.
that same metaphor of yours, I love it.
And it says all of these works, that very first sentence, all of her works taught lessons to children. And we take that to mean her books. It didn't say books.
Mm-hmm.
It said all of her works teach lessons to her children. Just like the mother tree in the parable of the twisted tree. What's it called?
The weathered tree.
The weathered tree, thank you. The sharing wisdom and truth with her children and care and love. The problem children she had encountered and the care and love which brought them to change, which isn't that the point of what our mother wants from us. That was the inspiration. And even adults, it says, would buy the books and read the stories, even though they didn't have kids, because of course the stories were never meant for kids.
Well, if you think about the problem cases in the scriptures, and the reason they're there is for us to learn. Alma the Younger,
Paul,
Corianton, Paul, King David.
All can be redeemed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, all redeemable. That's great.
And the works that taught the lessons, how many paintings did she do for each book? And there's 12 books. How many paintings for each book?
Dozens of paintings.
It's prolific painting.
So this is a prolific author.
Yeah, and each one of these paintings taught the lessons that she was trying to convey as well, which and a painting can mean different things to different people. Talk about layers.
Yeah.
And can teach more than maybe just the words book.
Beautiful. And so this, the fact that it's that prolific, I think brings up the point that the great weaver, Heavenly Mother, who only points to the Father and says, glorify the Father, glorify the Son, does not ask for our notice, does not ask for our worship or our praise, and yet in the background is prolifically weaving together this creation and providing the opportunities for us. Much like Olivia Canfield was not really known in her lifetime. Her book started to be known when she was an old woman, but it was after her death that it got noticed. Heavenly Mother is always there, weaving. All right. All of these children. Oh, go ahead.
The other thing that I remember now that I was going to say earlier, the tornadoes are whirlwinds. Enoch is associated with the whirlwind. And so Enoch's return, of the return of Enoch in the city is interesting that it's also tied in with Wendy, which part of the priesthood that has to return is the knowledge of the mother, which is occurring. Not only knowledge, but the power that exists within the knowledge. So it's interesting that those two things are tied there.
The foreign land, the city of Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
Foreign to
That's
this
good.
world.
Yeah. Love these tie-ins. Yeah,
In my
thank you.
mind, the tornado has to do just as much with Christ descending down as if it was in a tornado. I mean, how could anybody do that? The story you would tell would be that he was in a whirlwind type of a thing, or even angels.
Very tempestuous about him.
Yeah, even angels gathering around with the children in a circle of fire coming down. Draw a painting of that, and it's going to look like a tornado.
Oh my gosh. I have dreams about tornadoes all the time, and I've never understood.
I just thought you were crazy.
Well, even Wendy in the tornado. I mean, that's
Right.
It's just even more.
And the wind is what lifted her up, and there's you can keep pulling stuff out. I mean, there's so much here.
One quick thought I have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mary Magdalene being Christ's wife, Mary Magdalene, Wendy. There just seems to be, I don't know,
Interesting.
The
Well,
same syllables,
Same, you just
and
have
the
to put
same
down
first letters.
Yeah.
well, and so we had, three Marys at the cross, or three Miriams. Christ's mother and Christ's consort, both named Miriam. Christ has become the Father. He has ascended to the Father's throne. That title, that position, that office is held by Christ. Therefore, who is the mother?
Mary Magdalene.
Yeah. Now that's, yeah. Go ahead.
Adrian, another thing too is the rushing of winds when you have mother present in the conversation talking about her son. It's described as the rushing of winds.
Yeah, great. Kevin?
The mother spreads her influence through telling stories, by illustrating stories. She is not a didactic, preaching type of a soul. The power of storytelling is very, very old on our planet. The old wise women would be the ones that told stories. The old wise men would tell stories. Here is this lovely, prolific author telling stories.
And here's a book of 10 stories. Yep. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, that's a great point. And when Denver said he was able to convey more truth in a short book of 10 parables with no footnotes than he could in, thousands of pages otherwise, it's because he doesn't have to justify anything here. He can just teach it. He doesn't have to cite it. And the stories can contain more truth than the references. Well, so this brings us then, all of these children wanted to keep their mother's artwork together. Good call. They left it in the modest home in which their mother died. As their mother's fame grew, they had the idea of putting it on display, and the original little museum was open. Modest home, little museum. What does this say about how we value the works, the truths that are taught to us by mother? Her children wanted to, but very few. It was modest, it was small, but it was devoted. That's what I take from it.
And who would be her children?
Well, so that's a great question. Who would be her children? How do you become a child of Christ? Who becomes your father? The one you enlist to obey. Therefore, who becomes your mother? So her children are those who actually valued her. I think that defines who the children are. Valued her works enough to live them and obey them.
Go ahead.
So I like that. I really like that thought, because her books were written to children. That was like the intended audience, and yet repeatedly the idea is drawn out in the parables that it's even certain adults value them as much as the children do, because they gain insights from them. And so when you ask who are her children, well, it's specifically those who can become like little children.
Yeah, great point. Okay, next paragraph. Over the years, who's got it for us?
I do.
Thanks.
Over the years, people came from increasingly distant places to Brakhill to see the original artwork Olivia painted. They particularly wanted to see the art for her series on Wendy. Her modest home had been expanded to allow more of her artwork and original manuscripts to be put on display. Although Olivia died more than 3/4 of a century ago, generations of her readers came through Brakhill to pay tribute to the beloved writer, painter, and illustrator.
Okay, if we think about, at least when I think about the motif of being the Heavenly Mother, those who came and wanted to learn more as increasingly distant places, which ties back into the story spreading abroad after her death, more and more people coming and wanting to learn, generations of readers coming and trying to gain the truths, pay tribute, which is true. But it's also the fact that if we look at what happened to the truths that were here when Christ was on earth, the stories of Christ, although increasing numbers of people want to know and understand them, they've also been poorly curated and ultimately corrupted. The museum was inadequate, ultimately. And this story is about building a better and a more suitable and a more permanent museum to house the truths. And this brings us to part 2. So we just finished part 1. It was about 4 pages in total. And we're an hour into it. And there's 13 pages left or something. And that was part 1. It was about Olivie and her character, Wendy. And now we jump ahead to part 2. We get our friend David O'Connor. I'll start it off. So when the Wyoming Visitors Bureau compiled their latest numbers, only Yellowstone National Park drew more visitors than Little Brakhill. It was because of this the Wyoming legislature decided to build a proper museum for Olivie Canfield. Since public funds were being used, public land was also to be used for the site of the project. Okay, I'm going to substitute a few words and I'm going to read it again. When the council that watches these things compiled their latest numbers, they found that there were people on earth who were actually interested in the teachings of truth. It was because of this that the council decided that there should be a proper and fitting kingdom established in which people could come and gain the truths that were taught. Since this was going to be a project sponsored by those on the council, they allocated lands that they had the right to allocate for the use of the project, a promised land through a covenant. So now we're talking about the need to reestablish and more permanently establish a suitable, call it a library, call it a temple, call it a museum in the story, but a place where people can come and learn the truths. And so the council decided to do it, and the council will provide the location for it. And we're just waiting to find out where that is. But there's a man named David, and he's got a job to do. So let's read a little bit about David. All right. Forgive me if I proceed for a minute. David O'Connor, let's stop there. I don't have to tell you a lot about what the name David means, I hope. But O'Connor, that's an interesting name. It either means somebody who loves dogs, or it means wisdom, counsel, and strength.
And
it's Irish or Scottish, depending on spelling. Wisdom, counsel, and strength. Rack your brains and think about anything in Isaiah that might ring a bell about somebody with wisdom and counsel in that order and strength in Isaiah 11, for example. Isaiah 11 talks about a rod coming forth out of the stem of, and a branch growing out of its roots and so on. And the spirit of wisdom and the spirit of counsel will rest upon him, it says. So there's a man named David with all of these things implied in his name. The other thing that name implies, actually, the other meaning of O'Connor is inspector. Oh, just means of, by the way, or son of. One who inspects, one who therefore looks things over, or who would have judgment. Right. So that's an interesting name, but all the names in these tales mean things, of course.
So it's like a ruler.
Yeah, like a ruler, meaning one by which you measure, not one who tells you what to do.
But he's also the son of wisdom, the son of counsel. So he would be an actual son of, God.
Or a member of the Holy Order that was sent by the legislature, the council, sent somebody here to do a job. And now David was specifically sent to do it. He came to Brakhill to inspect the project. His employer was awarded by the state of Wyoming. Who's his employer? Well, it never says in the book, but who's David's employer?
The Lord.
The Lord, yeah. He is a laborer, and he calls other laborers, and their numbers are few. But in the employ of the Lord, he comes to inspect the project that was awarded by the council. that needs to take place. He was making notes on the demolition of the abandoned City Hall building, and we're gonna have a lot to say about the building, but let's just start reading about it. Boarded up, suffering from disuse. What does boarded up mean? I mean, what does that imply about a building? Derelict, run down, and you can't get in. Yeah, it's not just that it's in disuse because no one uses it, but you are actively prevented from getting in, from using it. Okay, it's cracked, leaking, weakened, and worn.
Weathered.
Oh, weathered, I'm sorry, weathered and worn, thank you. Does that remind you of Joseph Smith's last dream? And the barn, the leaky barn, and the weatherboards were off, and it was a mess, and it was a relic and derelict, and no one wanted it, and then they were fighting over it. It had once been grand, like Joseph's farm, but was now just a relic, part of which had fire damage. Just, well, there's a number of things we could consider there, but weathered tree had fire damage too, but that fire damage had some implications about it. On the one hand, you could look at fire as if it had once had the fire, it had once had the spirit and the life. The closest thing that you can have to a living thing that's not living is fire. And when there's nothing but an ember left, then you need someone to come and blow on that ember, the breath of life, to rekindle the fire that's missing. And that's what the German word Snuffer means.
Adrian.
Yeah.
Adrian, relic too is a word that brings to mind in the Catholic tradition and the Orthodox tradition, worshiping objects instead of the real Lord.
Good point. An object that is supposed to be a leftover of something more holy, and the object ends up worshipped instead of the holiness.
We read all about that in Triangularity.
Good point. Yeah, here we are in Triangularity. Yeah.
Although he may not have known it, how many relics have been hit by lightning?
How many relics have been hit by lightning? Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Yeah, we've had a few relics blowed up real bad on the tops of temples.
And the Nauvoo temple burnt by fire.
Yep, which had fire damage. A masonry structure with solid fir floor joists. Now, notice that the foundation is increasingly, is solid. So solid fir floor joists, lath and plaster walls, tile floors, a granite foundation, a formidable structure to demolish. But demolished it will be. Or formidable, depending on where you're from. We got to love that word. Okay, so David was sent to tear down and demolish the relic, to take down what was left of City Hall. But we still, in the story, we haven't even been taught about City Hall, other than that it's old and derelict and unused and needs to be torn down. When he literally broke into the structure through the front door barricades. How did David break into the structure?
He got into the front door. Baptism.
He got in through the front door through baptism. Interesting side note. Anyone try to prevent that from happening?
You have the legions of
the barricades.
Well, it's not something that you'll find published, but legions attacked and legions defended.
Adrian?
A 19-year-old. Yeah.
Another thing that's I think is fascinating in these parallel is the fact that a temple is meant to be a conduit between heaven and earth, that we can have association between the two. And so the temples that Joseph Smith built did indeed have their moments where they were filled with fire, and they could do that. However, once this building became old and derelict and that it was barricaded, meaning that no one was allowed to pass through that conduit anymore because of the keepers, the watchmen now in charge.
You enter not in yourselves, and you suffer not others to enter in. Those that are entering in, you keep them from doing so. Yeah, Great point. So he breaks in through the front door barricade, and he's surprised to see a large open room, an odd waste of open space. What's another word for this? It's empty. It's a big empty room, odd waste of open space, because that could be put to such better use if it were used properly. Why would a city hall need such a large open room, he thought. However, the cavernous opening in the front and center would aid in containing the debris as the pit is filled by them that digged it. As it collapses on itself and fills in its own emptiness. So when they bring the building down, the pit will be filled by them that digged it. O'Connor realized that the plan for demolition could collapse the building inward. So it's not that you have to attack this building externally to bring it down. It can be collapsed from within. That's kind of telling. So I take it to be the building is the derelict, what's left of the light that came originally from Joseph Smith, and it's carried on all these years with decreasing light, decreasing truth, until now it's just an old, empty, boarded up, derelict building that will collapse from within. That's what I take. Anybody else have a take to share? And David was sent to do it.
I think it's interesting or symbolic that kind of the symbol of the LDS Church, or what Joseph started and what it's become, is the Salt Lake Temple.
Yeah, I labeled it Brigham Young's Celestial Kingdom. That's kind of what I labeled it as.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it talks about the masonry structure with the solid floor joists, plaster walls, tile floor, granite foundation.
It was originally founded on a solid foundation.
Yeah.
But is doing nothing with it, suitable only to be collapsed.
Adrian?
Yeah.
Isn't it ironic that they are trying to shore up the foundation now and do a lot of work on it? And, with this, it seems like that's going to be all in vain. I heard stories about how that foundation was never going to move and nothing was going to take it down. So it's kind of ironic that they're trying to build it up physically and they're trying to do the same thing spiritually, but they no longer have the authority.
Yeah, under the Salt Lake Temple right now. Yeah, how ironic is that? Beautiful analogy or connection. Thank you.
Donald Danner posts the observation that Masonry and Masonic might have a correlation there.
Or Masonic, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
A Masonic temple. Yeah, interesting that too. Masonry, of course, also can mean stone as well as brick, by the way. And I always think of brick when I think of masonry, but stonemasons is a thing too. So interestingly, though, the building's wiring, plumbing, and roof are all copper, and there's a profit to be made salvaging some of the materials from this old structure. He hadn't figured that into their price, therefore there would be more profit on the job than first anticipated. All right.
Oh dear.
Precious metals. The building is still based on some plates. There is still truth there. And if you get as close as you can to the original plates, they were gold alloyed with copper and some other things, then you find that there is something worth salvaging. Although it's been corrupted, one of the first things David has done has been a scripture project. And I'm not trying to give Denver credit because, other people started it, other people worked on it, and he served as an advisor capacity only. So, but the point is, first thing was, let's salvage what's there. That's been done.
Well, he wrote this before that.
He wrote this well before that. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, did he write this before the new name? He wrote this 3 years before the new name. Yet he knew someone named David would have this job to do. And so first thing was salvage what is actually valuable still. And that's been done. And the act of salvaging that, just like the act of preserving the teachings of Oliver Canfield in a small, inadequate museum by those who cared enough, the act of salvaging the copper wiring and plumbing got us a covenant.
And profit, PRO, PHET.
Yep.
A profit to be made.
Yeah, salvaging some of the materials. There was a profit to be made. You just can't make this stuff up, folks, even though Denver can. All right.
One more comment.
Yeah, go.
His company, being those who sent him,
yep,
had not figured that into their price. There would be more profit on the job than first anticipated, as in they're getting something out of it, and potentially he's getting something out of it greater than they expected or anticipated would be able to be salvaged.
So there's more there that they can, more fruit harvested than they thought, potentially. Yeah. So although it's a battered ruin, he's able to find that there is value there and that this can work. Yeah.
That's exciting.
That is exciting.
Well, I think it's interesting how he talks about the light fixtures and the light.
Why don't you read that for us? Go ahead.
Okay. There were odd neon light fixtures which seemed incompatible with the rest of the building. There must have been some salvage done on this place already, he realized. He wondered why the light fixtures had been taken and replaced, and not some of the other valuable material. I think it was many of the saints, the current saints, have been taken out of the building. The ones that had the light, and they've gone somewhere else, and somebody tried to replace that light, and it didn't fit with the building.
Yeah, great point.
Elvis has left the building.
And I take it that, the original, we'll learn later that originally there were gold-plated chandeliers giving a warm, glowing golden light to the building, which is the light of heaven. The golden light he's described as being the cloven tongues of fire, the celestial light. And now you have neon, totally, who puts neon lights inside a building? Notice it's not fluorescent. Yeah. What are neon lights used for?
To draw attention.
Where?
Outside of buildings.
Vegas, yeah, signs, commercialized. This thing was commercialized, which was totally unsuitable, incompatible, not the right approach, the wrong kind of light, but the real light left. In fact, where did they take the real lights? Stuck them in the courthouse. The lawyers took those. They did. They stuck them in the courthouse. So that's a great point about the light. It's totally what is offered for light now, or what is held up as a light, is the men who run the thing. Yeah, and the men endlessly quote the other men who run the thing in this great big circular quotation in this beehive, the echo chamber, and they quote the last guy that died, except he was speaking as a man, not a prophet, so we can't quote him, but maybe we can quote the other guy until he turns out to be, horribly racist or something. So the point is that the light is totally unsuitable. The glowing golden light of heaven left the building, and that was the first thing that left. Notice other valuable materials were left, but the most valuable, the light,
the Shekinah,
the presence of God, the light of heaven, left first.
In other words, it became dark.
Became dark, yeah. Okay, who wants to pick up inside the front entry? Who's got it? Somebody want to read?
I'll continue.
Oh, go ahead, thanks.
Okay, I gotta pop it back up here. Inside the front entry of this once elegant city hall was a plaque on the wall, which caught O'Connor's eye. It had faux iconic pillars on it, paying tribute to someone in Gothic lettering. Appeared to be solid brass and would make an interesting keepsake for his office. He made a note to have it removed and brought to him. He planned to add it to his office collection. You want me to keep going?
No, let's pause right there.
Okay.
So, front entry, elegant city hall. There's a plaque that caught his eye. And it was made of solid brass, we later find out. But the plaque has faux ionic pillars on it. And faux means false. Ionic means what? It's one of the, Ionic is one of the 3 schools of thought in Greek architecture. Listen to her. Wendy's over here popping off. What are they? Whitney. Sorry, Wendy.
Okay. Yeah, Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian.
Are the 3 schools of thought. Okay. And so, and the 3 column types. And these are the Ionic ones. But the point is, it's faux and it's Greek. And it's paying tribute in Gothic lettering. Gothic lettering is lettering that was actually first developed for writing scripture, New Testament. It's a particular Gothic, it's an alphabet style. All of this points to scripture, New Testament, paying tribute, but it caught his eye. It caught David's eye, but it's hidden behind this Greek facade, Gothic lettering, but it appeared to be solid brass. There's something there. The Ensign magazine. Oh, yeah, sorry. Ensign. All right, it would make an interesting keepsake for his office. Made a note to have it removed, brought to him, to add to his collection. So he's finding things not only that are intrinsically valuable, like copper, but things that are also valuable because they catch his eye.
I also noticed the pillars.
Mhm.
Pillars were used in a previous, the 5 men, the 5 men of God. Pillars was another example.
The man being between the pillars, yeah, or Christ between the 2 thieves. So, okay. Well, since you brought it up, and how many pillars are there on this? There's 2. He defines it later. There's 2 pillars. Okay, what's that the front of? The 2 pillars.
The temple in Jerusalem.
It's Solomon's temple. The pillars are even named Yakin and Boaz. I mean, it's a clear, yeah, but it's Ionic, yeah, but it's a clear point that wait, this caught my eye. There is something here, and it's been hidden. It's under a faux layer, whatever, but there's solid brass in there. And that caught his eye, that there's something left. And it's going to add to his collection. Go ahead, McKay.
Oh, I was just going to tell you, I once was called to Denver's office to talk to him about something, and he apologized because his office was kind of a mess. And I said, no, I'm happy to come to your office. I wanted to see if there were any memorabilia from your prior job sites, but I can see there aren't. And he went, no, look at this, and look at this, and look at this. Look at all these things. He had virtually no memorabilia there, but he was grabbing stuff left and right to prove that there was memorabilia in his office.
All right, well, let's read the next paragraph about the memorabilia. Who wants to? Go ahead.
David O'Connor's office was filled with memorabilia from his career in construction. He collected eclectic bits from his work around the western United States. It was a collection of things which caught his eye, more than things which were particularly more than things with any particular meaning to him. One day, a visitor to his office was asking him about things in his office when the City Hall plaque came up. It read, dedicated to the honor of Ira Locus, Brakhill's chief benefactor and greatest citizen.
Keep going to the end of the page.
O'Connor was asked who was Ira Locus, but he didn't know. Well then, why do you have a plaque honoring him in your office? Because I like the way it looks.
Okay, let's go ahead and pause right there. Thank you. Couple of points I'll bring up. What is David's office? I won't tell you what seat I occupy, and I won't leave a seat for someone else to take it. Office, I think, has a double entendre there, and of course there is an office that is filled by David, and his career in construction. He's built things before. You don't send lead to do what you will know only iron can accomplish.
I'd have to say that even from a more temporal standpoint, he talks about building his own home and coming up with the plans to do it himself and overseeing the construction of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then that leads then to construction of another home.
Well, and when you think about it, and again, I don't want to make this all about Denver too much. I want to make it about the office, though, which is important. Building the last days temple at New Jerusalem, which will open the fiery corridor and usher in the return of the city of Enoch and the return of the Savior at the end of the world and millennial reign, doesn't strike me as an entry-level position. You would hope that the guy has built stuff before, and I don't just mean physically constructing buildings, although that's certainly important. That office, I think, is entirely critical, because if that fails, the whole earth will be utterly wasted at his coming. This is really critical. If the construction doesn't happen, if it's not built, and I don't just mean a building, I mean if the connection's not made. So anyway, somebody asked him about the plaque. Who was Ira Locus? No idea. No idea. This person is nothing but a footnote in history. It doesn't matter. Why do you have a plaque? Because I like the way it looks. It caught my eye. So there's something, again, about his eye that matters in what he fills his office with, the memorabilia, and I think it has to do with being a seer.
Okay. And he's looking for truth.
Mm-hmm. Hold on. Phil said he's looking for truth.
That's it.
Oh, okay.
Also an eye single to God's glory, only wanting to do God's will and having that guide him.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then this little conversation continues. Where'd you get it? Let's read that and the next two paragraphs, and then we finish part 2 of the parable. Somebody want to read?
I'll read.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Whitney.
Okay. Do you want me to start with the O'Connor had to think?
Yeah.
O'Connor had to think for a while before remembering. The clue which allowed him to place the plaque was its reference to Brakhill. The only job he'd performed there was on Olive Canfield's museum. He first demolished an abandoned City Hall building. It came from a rundown building I tore down in Brakhill, Wyoming.
Go ahead, one more.
The discussion had him wondering about Ira Locus, but he never followed up to find out about him. No one alive remembered anything about Ira. Even his few living descendants did not know anything about an ancestor from 5 generations in their past.
5 generations. Okay, so I wanted to point out here that the only way he could even place it was the reference to Brakhill, and the only job he'd ever done in Brakhill was on Olive Canfield's museum. This is the first we've read about him building the museum. All we've read about was he was sent to demolish the old structure that encumbered the ground and had to be torn down so that the museum could be built. But so it doesn't even, nowhere else will we ever read that David O'Connor built the museum, except right here.
A flashback.
And then a flashback.
Right.
Yeah. We go to the office.
Yeah. And this is flash forward years later. So this is perhaps after this creation is wrapped up, and at a future point, people are looking at various, I'll call it memorabilia, for that's a good enough term, from the various jobs that this man has done. And, oh yeah, I remember that one. I had to go tear down that building and so put up the museum. So he started to wonder about Ira Locus, but couldn't even remember who he was. No one remembered anything about him. He became utterly lost to history, Ira Locus. And so that finishes part 2 of the parable. And now we change topics again. And now we're going to go back 5 generations to Ira Locus. So
makes me think of nothing but a footnote in history when it talks about, what was the word? No one alive remembered anything about Ira.
Yeah. Even his few living descendants. That's really odd. Yeah. Normally you don't have few living descendants. Normally the number of descendants you have grows exponentially. Certainly if you're Brigham Young, that happens because
40 wives.
Yeah, 40, 50, 60. I lost count. And yet few living descendants, at least in the flash forward circumstance where someone is asking about a past creation in which David O'Connor participated, you find few living descendants of Ira Locus. Okay. All right. Let's go on to
5 generations. Do you, I mean, 3 to 4 generations has passed now, so we're in the 5th generation now. Is that referring to where we find ourselves now, or is that referring to cycles of creation?
Yes. Cursing seemed to
Good
always
question.
come until the 4th and 5th generation. So maybe it was a cursing. Maybe it's where we are now after the cursing received when Joseph died.
Good point.
Go
ahead. Jared?
Me? Okay. A comment about what I guess having descendants, just like claiming to be the seed of Abraham because you can trace a biological line, doesn't necessarily make you the seed of Abraham. I've wondered if that doesn't mean that the theology or the philosophy that he had passed on had basically all been lost, and no one really adopted the lifestyle that he had, and that was basically lost, not necessarily the, biological seed.
Yeah, great way to think about it.
I think McKay had a comment.
McKay? Or,
Well, I was just going to say, there's 2 Greek words for life. There's bios, biological descendants, like we just heard, and zoe, eternal life. And I think you've already hinted that the living here, the living descendants that are few, are those who have eternal life, because Brigham did have a lot of bios descendants, but those who honor Brigham and remember him are not among his living descendants. Eternal life. Anyway, that was just the point you kind of made, but
yeah, good point. Thanks, McKay. All right, and just so we take our quick temperature, if you're in the book, we're on page 74. This thing goes to 83. There's 9 more pages, basically. And we're an hour and a half in. And I don't want to keep people up to the point that they're just snoozing on the other end of this.
We're not snoozing. Keep going.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. Ira Locus had been Brakhill's leading citizen in his lifetime. Now remember, Brakhill, think about the Holy Mountain. Think about the family of God. How about his cattle and mining businesses? And in the interest of time, I'll just say cattle and mining businesses. Cattle, you're exploiting life. Mining, you're exploiting Mother Earth. Both of these businesses involve taking something that you don't create. Fair enough. And I'm not criticizing cattle or mining. It's just the nature of the businesses. Exploitative.
IRA is short for Internal Revenue Service, the IRS taking money from everybody.
Oh, yeah, that's funny. Here, I'll share my screen again.
That's good.
No, let's talk. Oh, and I didn't even talk about Hugh Winder Nibley. There's a whole thing there, but we don't have time for that. Let's go to Ira Locus, because Hugh Winder Nibley has some cool parallels. But okay, Ira Locus, he's the leading citizen, the leading employer. He has immense political power, 4 ministers as a model of righteousness. Believes he was a very good man. He personally funded and oversaw the City Hall project. His fame was known throughout the West. He was rewarded with honors from his people, and 5 generations later, no one knew anything about him. Ira Hinckley, oddly, was Gordon B. Hinckley's grandfather, and he is the builder of Cove Fort, which at the time this book was written, Cove Fort was being restored and had a big grand opening, and it was a big deal. Gordon Hinckley was particularly proud that his grandfather had built Cove Fort. Ira Hinckley married Angeline Wilcox Noble. So you've got Ira Locus right there and Gordon B. Hinckley's grandparents. Blessed, honored pioneers they were. Locus seems to be a composite of the blessed and honored pioneers in general, but Brigham Young kind of specifically. But at the time when Gordon Hinckley, who was, I mean, all of the Trek stuff that started happening in the church, the Blessed Noble Pioneer stuff, all of that started under Gordon B. Hinckley.
And all of the holy pilgrimage sites you can go to and visit. The holy relics.
Good point. All the holy relics Brent just pointed out. Nauvoo Restoration Incorporated, all the Nauvoo stuff, including the Nauvoo Temple. All of those holy relic sites were under Gordon B. Hinckley in honor of the pioneer ancestors that he spoke of frequently. And so it's not, I think, surprising that you have his grandparents providing the names for Ira Locus. At least in my estimation, that's my guess. Is and always will be Brakhill's greatest citizen. Men of his stature, prominence, and generosity just does not occur the same place twice. Today, without any doubt, Ira is our greatest citizen, is the quote about Ira Locus. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for who this guy is. But we can go on and we just kind of saw the overview of him, and we can go through him in detail if you'd like, or we can kind of move ahead. What would you like to do?
Well, I'd like to add something. To add to that being Brigham Young, to me, the plaque that he found that caught his eye was the temple endowment. Denver is one of the few people who really, the temple endowment caught his eye. He gained some value from the temple endowment, and that really was Brigham Young.
Good point. Yeah, the version we have. Yeah, great point. But why don't we can kind of skip ahead about Ira Locus. We're all kind of familiar with the character. I want to point out at the end of a couple paragraphs later, he took that conviction seriously and provided many public examples of goodness and charity. That is an important thing to note, because Christ said, when you do alms, let not your left hand know what your right hand doeth, and all of that. But Ira, made a show of it. He did good things. Don't get me wrong, but he made sure everybody wore yellow T-shirts and the news cameras were rolling when he did them. I mean, okay. Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, but you can't say Mormon helping hands anymore because that makes baby Jesus cry. Yeah.
So that brings to mind the idea that the Savior says, you're supposed to do your alms in private, but if you don't, you receive your reward. And that's what we see with Ira. Ira receives his reward, and he's applauded and held up, and it's great. And the other thing that I really like the juxtaposition between Olivier and Ira, because of the fact that Ira's all about, I shouldn't say all about, but one thing that jumped out to me this time when reading this parable was that Ira's not a bad dude. He's got some things twisted that it's like, doing your alms in private, and so that's kind of been out of shape. Doing things like building the city hall. It's interesting that he's trying to accommodate the needs of a community, which are really good, but ultimately the comfort of the community is worthless. It doesn't prove long lasting. It lasts for a short time and then it's done. Whereas it's really interesting that Olivier, when the work that she puts into what she does, she becomes a master artist. And a master, I would say, on several levels, not just in English, but child psychology and different levels that you would have to be able to attain to be able to write what she wrote and produce what she produced. And so it was never for the fact that Olivia's never doing it for the fact that, I'm going to do this great work as far as, for other people like what he's doing. She's doing it for the fact that she knows she has the capacity and she's becoming a master in what she's doing. Whereas everything that Ira does, he spends his time raising cattle, spends his time in mining operations, but he's not a master of either. He's a master of nothing. And I find that That's very typical of humanity, of ourselves, and I saw a lot of myself in that, because we all kind of want to produce something which is meaningful for other people, but did we become a master? Did we become an expert in that one thing because we had the capacity to do it, because God gave us the ability to produce something great? Or did we do it so that, we could be lauded and people can pat us on the back? Olivia never got that, and yet she did the work anyway. Anyway, that's a little jumbled, but those were some of my thoughts.
Great thoughts. Yeah, very good. Thank you. And I liked what you said about how your father seeth in secret rewards you openly, but if you make it public, then you have your reward. And that made me think of this statue. So I just thought I'd put the picture up. There's Brigham Young, at the height of all of the pioneers in Salt Lake. That's the Brigham Young statue.
Standing on top of the people.
Yeah, pointing to the bank, and it reminds me of the tapestry they made with Ira standing there with his hands on his hips at a jaunty angle, looking confident. Well, there it is. There it is.
Adrian, it's funny because one of the issues I had was when the LDS Church said a lot of the teachings of Brigham Young weren't correct, and this and this and this, it was a thing of his, because of his time, he was born in and stuff, and so those teachings aren't valid.
He was a man of his time, yeah.
But he was supposed to be a prophet, infallible. So, there you go.
There you go. All right. So Ira's single most expensive act of public charity, expensive and public. Now, and as Edwin pointed out, this is not a bad man. He is doing good things. Was the announcement that the old Adobe endowment house would be torn down and they would build a new temple of brick and stone. Oh, wait, no, that was Brigham Young. They tore down the endowment house though, and they built the new city hall of brick and stone. Something I wanted to point out is that there's some overtures to the tabernacle. When the LDS tabernacle was built, the span of the roof in that dome shape couldn't be done. The roof was going to collapse as soon as they took out the scaffolding, blah, blah, blah. It was a marvel of engineering because Brigham Young wanted a clear span of 100 feet and with no pillars, and he got 125. It was absolutely miraculous, so that there would be that big open room when you walked in. The balconies were built later. When it was built, it was a big open room with room for the orchestra up front. And David O'Connor wonders why you would need such a thing.
And they did tie a lot of the boards and rawhide.
Rawhide, yeah, they did. So we have this kind of, the whole pioneer thing, including the tabernacle, the temple square, all tied up here, which was the center of town, you'll notice. Built by the original settlers, built of brick and stone, granite block, cut by his mining operation. It would be the center. He wanted to become the heart of the community. Well, in Salt Lake City, all of the streets are numbered off of the temple. It was designed to be the very heart of the community, off of Temple Square. Offices, indoor plumbing, storage, meeting rooms, all of that's in the temple. 170 rooms in the Salt Lake Temple. He intended the main entrance to be usable as a community ballroom. Elegant, open, tile floor, 2 stories tall, lit by gold-plated chandeliers. All of this can describe the elegance of the temple or the tabernacle. The sound to fill the room but not echo. And you've talked about the acoustics of the tabernacle, even the fact that there were no metal pins or no metal nails. And they say, it was so the acoustics would be perfect. No, it's because they couldn't get metal nails. Steel was very scarce. But anyhow, commissioned tapestries depicting local scenery to be hung on the walls. And he sent they sent artists actually to Paris. They sent 4 young men to Paris to learn to paint murals so that they could paint the inside of the Salt Lake Temple. And I'm kind of just plowing forward here because I think we all see the overview. So I'm just hitting some high notes. I hope that's okay. mostly because I don't want people to be sitting here at midnight. So he doubly blessed the community in his generosity because of the work that he provided. It was a city project, but he paid all the costs. Not a cent of taxpayer money went into the ambitious project. Well, yeah, just the tithing, but no government, no tax money. This was all church money, church labor. Word of the project spread far beyond the Brakhill community. People came from as far as Cody and Sheridan. Well, if you're driving, by the way, I mentioned this earlier, if you're driving to Sturgis, yeah, Cody and Sheridan are on your way. And it even spread, you know, from there to western South Dakota. That's where Sturgis is, Casper, Cheyenne. It was expected the official dedication would be attended by a larger audience than Brakhill, not disappointed. The dedication to Salt Lake Temple was on April 6th, 1893, the anniversary of the founding. And here we have July 4th, the anniversary of the founding. We have the governor, the state legislature, newspapers from 5 states, 600 communities. So the fame now spread. Contrast that with the fame of Olivia Canfield, which during her lifetime was none whatsoever. But this was designed for publicity. This was, and you know, when publicity is what you seek, that's what you get. Publicity is one of the LDS Church's fortes, right?
Neon lights.
The neon lights, yeah. The PR thing, I mean, they hire the best, they pay for the best, and they get the best. It's interesting how many terms you can go search on Google and they will come up first on things you would never expect. Any term they're interested in, they own. They just buy it. Hook, line, and sinker.
It's also one of the 4 characteristics of the Church of the Devil, popularity.
Great point. Well, and unlike, again, unlike Olivia Canfield, not popular. Yeah, priestcraft. Okay, in the next paragraph, we have this, the Lutheran minister, a religious figure, and I would add somewhat corrupted or false religious figure.
Where are you?
Top of 77. Brakhill's Lutheran minister gave the dedicatory prayer. The greatest leading citizen of any community in Wyoming, selfless, generous heart, much more than a city hall. We now own a landmark built of such solid materials and containing such works of art that it will endure forever. This was Brigham's watchword when he found out that the workmen were inserting granite chips between the blocks to stabilize them, to conserve expensive mortar, because they were trying to save money. He had it torn down and done again. He said, no, we will spare no expense, because this, don't think that you're building for 100 years. You're building to endure forever. That's what he told them about the mortar. Future generations will recall our day. This remains a testament to our times, our great benefactor. They'll wonder at how we could have built such a public temple. Well, there's a giveaway. And the wonder will be answered by what is found inside. And what did David Connor find inside?
Emptiness.
It was empty except for a plaque with faux pillars on the front, disguising and hiding a relic of what was once there. Unknown to Ira Locus, well, they had the tapestry and they had the solid brass that would stand forever in the main lobby paying tribute to Brakhill's greatest citizen. How long did the plaque stand? Until David had it removed and brought to him. And notice he said he made a note to have it removed and brought to him. He didn't take it out himself. All right, and I'm sorry I'm moving fast. Is everybody okay? I'll pause for comments. Okay, we're good? All right, we'll keep going. My wife will tell me if I need to correct course, right? Okay, thank you. You look tired too. It's been a big day. Ira was surprised because they had hidden it from him, but he pleased him. The surprise pleased him at the top of 78. It seemed natural.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just took note in the previous paragraphs how many words refer to the gospel or teachings that we once knew, endure forever, testament, temple, even tapestry. The tapestry maker wove his likeness. Where did we read about weaving something? The beginning, the net that was being woven. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are, what's the word I'm looking for? They're the word left me. Similar, but counterparts to the counterfeit. That's the word I'm looking for. Counterfeit words that do have meaning, but in this circumstance, they're counterfeit to what they should mean.
Yeah, that's a good point. And natural is another one of those. It seemed natural for his generosity to be memorialized. Because the natural man is, in fact, an enemy to God and has been from the fall of Adam and will be forever and ever. Okay, well. So the governor, political figure. Now remember, no one can get elected governor without Ira Locus' blessing. That was pointed out. So the governor's in his back pocket. Of course, they're all kissing his big behind. And he confirmed the building was to hold its first ball. The orchestra traveled from the state capitol. Everyone present already knew Ira Locus is and always will be Brakhill's greatest citizen. He confirmed what everyone already knew. How did they know it? Well, because Ira Locus made sure they knew it. How does everybody know that Brigham is God's the lion of the Lord? Because Brigham made damn sure everybody knew he was the lion of the Lord. He told them over and over. So you see my point. They all parroted exactly what they'd been taught. Honor your leaders. It's the man in charge. You got to remember the 3 W's. What to kiss, who's to kiss, and when to kiss it. And
oh yeah, and that title, beloved, all of a sudden is now the big popular thing to say.
Yeah, our beloved prophet, which is horribly offensive in the halls of heaven. This sounded right to the crowd, who erupted in applause at these final remarks, because it's exactly what they want. It's the Gentile affliction. Give us someone to rule over us. Please don't make us responsible for our own actions. We want to go with the crowd. Tell us how far apart to stand, what mask to wear, and whether we can or cannot burn down a Target store. All right. Sorry, I'm a little sarcastic tonight. The governor then led the eager throng up the stairs into the spacious main room, the orchestra, and the only person visible in the tapestries is, of course, Ira Locus. He is the most important. And frankly, to this day, who gets the love? Is it Brigham or is it Joseph? In the LDS Church. Yeah, where's Joseph Smith University? Where's the statues? The Brigham Young statue, I showed you the picture of it. Where's the Joseph statue like that?
Nothing.
No, he's down there next to his brother sitting on a bench in Temple Square. Or, Carthage, yeah. They do have a Carthage one later. All right. So large 2-story scene, larger than life, had Ira standing in the foreground, his trademark white hat. Good guys always wear white hats. With his hands on his hips, exuding a confident pose of a leading citizen, proudly portrayed, permanent splendor. And we know later the tapestry was burned. The permanent splendor is ashes. All right. The new chandeliers, we already alluded to this. The brightly lit room, warm light, it's eye-catching. There's the eye again, catching. And I think that again refers to truth and to seership. Before long, people began to recognize the fixtures were covered with 24-karat gold, the real thing, not an imitation. 24-karat is pure gold. So the fixtures being gold, where else would we find, I don't know, a gold candlestick? Great big one, very expensive.
The menorah?
The menorah in the temple. That is an appropriate light source for a temple. This was, much was done appropriately and properly. 24-karat gold, which added to the light's hue. It's the golden light of heaven that Denver's written about. And then you have the polished brass plaque centered on the wall beneath the orchestra's landing, 2 cast pillars. And now we finally read what the plaque says. dedicated to the honor. Wherefore give me thine honor, I believe is a quote from Lucifer, of Ira Locus, Brakhill's greatest chief benefactor and greatest citizen. Brakhill's chief benefactor, greatest citizen. So chief implies the chief seats. Greatest, well, who deserves that title?
The Lord.
Yeah. He who is least among you is the greatest of all. So all of this is backwards. It's counterfeit, as has been pointed out. No community since Rome herself. What's Rome associated with? The Vatican. Yeah, that took the original Olive Canfield Museum and turned it into, well, Disneyland and a great way to get rich, and pomp and circumstance, and gold and silks and scarlets and fine twined linens and many harlots.
And the Crusades.
And the Crusades, yes. All right, Rome herself had more reason to believe they had an enduring public tribute to a man. What happened to Rome? It fell, it crumbled, and now it's a wretched ruin too. Monuments to men crumble and come to an end. This is the second time we've talked about stone. And the first time it was continents, even continents shift, but truth endures. Stone crumbles and comes to an end. Truth endures forever. So this brings us to the next part. I'll pause and take a breath. Who'd like to comment?
I would like to know the rest of the story one day about Denver and Brigham Young. I don't think we've heard it.
I've heard it like third hand, so I don't feel qualified to relay it because I wasn't there and I don't know. But yeah, Brigham and Denver arguing, and Denver making a good point, and Joseph stepping out of the shadows and saying, "He's got you there, Brigham." I don't know the details. Anyone else? All right. Well, over the decades, the City Hall was a place, many entertaining evenings were spent by the town. When were people suitably entertained in a parable? The 10th parable. When the larger-than-life faces were projected up on the screen and the lighting was suitable and the music, and everybody left the conference meeting, the priesthood meeting, suitably entertained. And the young man in parable 10 that leaves the birthday, or not birthday celebration, now you got me doing it, leaves the priesthood meeting suitably entertained, encounters an angel on the way in, and later that night finds out it was Sarah, the mother of the righteous. Oh, who also sits on a throne. Oh, well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But everyone was suitably entertained. It was Brakhill's heart for 2 generations. Note that it's 2 generations. So, in other words, the point is that the City Hall was no longer enlightening so much as it was entertaining. But it was still useful, and it was so well built, it required little maintenance. We don't need much revelation anymore, said Gordon Hinckley. We had all we need. We had so much that came through Joseph. There was such a foundation laid. The foundation is granite. We really don't need much more. We can run on fumes for generations. Yeah, interview with Mike Wallace is interviewing Gordon Hinckley and says, so what was your last revelation, or talking about receiving revelations? And he says, well, I don't know that we need much revelation anymore. We have so much that came through Joseph Smith. Yeah, I know. He said that.
The building became a tourist site.
Yes. Their house is a museum where people come to see them. Yeah, exactly. It became a tourist site. And the community got used to a building that didn't require regular repair, didn't require revelation. The public got used to the fact that all that came from the empty cisterns was drivel. And they rejoiced in it. Yeah, we don't need it. The building, everything's still holding together. The church is growing.
Hey, I have a comment here. You know, when it says that and the community got used to a building which did not require regular repair, it seems to point out people who don't necessarily think they need to repent much, because the regular repair seems to be a pointer to repentance, constant repentance.
Excellent point, Rob. And contrast that with Olive Canfield and her stories that caused children to change. Change is repentance. So, yeah, a beautiful catch. Well, times change, as do communities. The U.S. highway gets built. It was not practical to run it through the center of Brakhill, so it ran to the north with 2 exits for the town. Promontory Point was where the 2 ends of the railroad came together, and that was north of Salt Lake by quite a ways. And that brought commercialism and commercial success. Salt Lake, at that point, was now tied to the rest of the world and could participate more fully with Babylon in commerce. The highway traffic offered commercial opportunities, and over time, the new businesses, hotels, restaurants, service stations, prospered more than the old businesses which were in the center of town. Well, what's at the center of town? The Temple Square. That's not prospering. I mean, despite the fact that, you spend $6 billion building a mall next to it. Some old-time businessmen saw the opportunity to survive required them to move. Old-time businessmen requires them to move. Well, who are the old-time businessmen? The geriocracy that runs the church. Yeah, the 15. And they start to realize, if we're going to survive, we're going to have to move. We're going to have to change. We're going to have to adapt. So let's hire some PR firms. Let's hire some marketing firms. Let's do some surveys and some focus groups and figure out how we can message this and do some hard sell if we can. Energy costs rose over the decade. Older building needed renovation to make them cost effective. But Brakhill City Hall was a masonry structure. It could not be easily improved. In other words, they were not equipped to improve it. They had, frankly, no idea. It was too expensive. It was prohibitive. It would be impossible to replace them without cutting the masonry walls. Talking about the heating and the plumbing, where you get at the copper, by the way. Without cutting the masonry walls which supported the upper floor and the roof. Well, what happens if you cut the walls that support the upper floor and the roof?
Collapses.
How do you think David collapsed it? Probably did the same thing. You cut the walls and it collapses in. By the time the community needed to renovate the dilapidated structure, or I would add, realized they needed to, the cost of doing so were high enough, it made sense to consider replacing it altogether. So Denver has spoken before about, is it possible to reform the church? I mean, he's even said, bingo, hey, congratulations. You just got called into the quorum of the 12 because, you're the replacement for the last one that died, and boom, you're a new apostle. And so you go in there and you start preaching and teaching and pushing and scripture. Could you right the ship? No. In 6 months, you'd be down. Even the church president at this point could not change the course. And there's infighting, and there's, certain things are so culturally entrenched, so financially entrenched. There is way too much to lose. It is way too expensive to reroute this thing or to repurpose it, to point it back, to change, to repent is just way too costly. And so you'll find that the city council is the one who decides it's probably better to tear it down.
Like
and start over.
Denver's dream of the train that gets derailed, and then it just crashes, car by car, and the ones at the end don't even know what's happening till it's done, but there's no correcting it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, so they decide to not only build a new center or a new city hall, but it's a new location. Rather than, trying to renovate what's there and, like you said, correct. No, we're just going to go with the world. We're going to go where the commercial opportunities are. So this church, this organization, everything it represents is going off and chasing commercialism, popularity, thus leaving the center of the city hall lot vacant if you just tear down what's there. and available for building a museum to all of Canfield, which is what matters, which is what endures. And the city hall that they go build, it's implied it's not going to endure either. So they get the bids. All the bids were opened together, and it was only slightly more expensive to build a new one. The city council, and that's interesting because councils, that has a heavenly meaning, decided the slight cost difference was worth it to get more modern building located closer to where most people worked, most traffic was flowing. So the old city hall was abandoned for public meetings. The light fixtures were removed and put into the courthouse. The tapestries taken down and stored and ultimately burned. And by the time they were burned, no one had even seen Ira's proud stand for 20 years. So gone and forgotten years ago. It had been 20 years since anybody even paid attention. And I think that's telling. That's in all of our lifetimes.
You know,
go ahead.
I think it refers a little bit to the new conference center. It's the other building.
Yeah, I think there's a great analogy there. And how much has the church changed in the last 20 years? Yeah, it really has. And it's accelerating. And all of the if-thens are waiting in the wings, as Denver said. All right. So let's pick it up. For a few years, the old city hall. Who'd like to read? Go ahead, Phil.
For a few years, the old city hall became a library building with neon light fixtures providing the patrons enough light to read inside the cavernous main library room. Eventually, they closed the library and the building was boarded up. From time to time, the children of Brakhill would sneak into the building and use it for play. Younger children would pretend it was a castle and hold sword fights on the main staircases. Teenagers would use it to conceal underage drinking. During winter, the kids would build campfires in the abandoned masonry building. Though it had few flammable materials inside, there were 2 occasions when the Brakhill Fire Department came to put out fires.
Okay. So, first, it's a library. What does that imply?
Knowledge. There was still knowledge to be had for those who were willing to go and find it and look it up and dig through it.
Yeah. So you can still go in there and dig through it and dig out some knowledge. It's still a place of learning. It was desecrated. Would you want neon lights in a library? How do you read books?
Well, it's dimly lit, so it's cavernous. So it's hard to see. It's hard to find what you're looking for.
Yeah. So it's like you said, dig it out. Inadequate light, but still some knowledge there for those that care to seek, which is true. We've inherited a great deal from the legacy left to us, and that was preserved by the blessed honored pioneers. And we do owe a debt of gratitude, a sincere debt of gratitude, because had it not been for the fact, frankly, if you had not been able to commercialize what Joseph Smith did, it would not exist now. Period. If they couldn't make money off of it, why would they defend it? Why would they continue to perpetuate it? And so the fact that they did that, although evil, it allowed it to last 4 generations. It allowed us to come across it.
I wonder how many people enter that structure with recommends to enter that structure, even though they wrote the word.
They're sneaking in to build fires.
Oh yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, those
concealing underage drinking.
Concealing underage drinking. What are you looking at?
I was reading the comments.
Oh yeah.
Well, it stopped being used as a library, and so even gaining knowledge was thrown out the door, and it became a place. Yeah.
So
and pretend and
to go and to play and to pretend. Yeah, and the idea of gaining knowledge, frankly, has been thrown out. Yeah, eradicated, discouraged. Yeah, dinner and a movie is what the temple became. And the idea, in fact, we don't talk about that. Remember Denver talking about how he was shut down in the celestial room. the temple workers coming and telling him, we don't talk about that here. Probably on 2 occasions, the fire department showed up to put out the fire.
I was going to say, build a campfire.
What?
A campfire, yeah. There were people seeking
The children?
and knowledge, so they build a campfire and it gets put out.
The children show up and
To try to learn.
yeah, yeah. On 2 occasions, he's told, don't discuss those things, not even in the temple. So knowledge is not, and frankly now, the LDS Church does not encourage people to independently study, seek, search, get knowledge. Study groups are verboten. All you need to know you will get from the Ensign, and that is our new curriculum, where we will endlessly quote one another. Here's this week's conference talk. Now stand up and give it, is what it's become.
So where it says for a few years the old city hall became a library building, I have to think of Hugh Nibley's time in the church where he was actually bringing forth light and new, I don't know if it was new knowledge, but knowledge was had. And now I don't think the church could even be considered a library building, because the books that they do have, the scriptures have been corrupted themselves. And so this group of people who loved Mother's words, loved them enough to actually go and try to reclaim what once was.
Great point. Well, you brought up Nibley. Let me just very quickly give a sketch of Hugh Winder Nibley. He insisted on reading relevant primary, secondary.
One guy they caught on the roof.
Sorry?
Sorry, Mike. You're talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just mute. So he could read the originals in Arabic, Coptic, Dutch, Egyptian, French, German, Greek, Hebrew, Italian, Latin, Old Norse, Russian, and other languages at sight. He was an ardent defender of Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. He was born in 1910. He was an awkward child, and he was sent on a mission because they hoped he would gain some social skills, honestly. And that's documented. He founded farms, which became the Maxwell Institute, and after his death, became completely torn down and thrown out. The library was torn down when he died. Collected works were prepared and saved by his children, though. This is, now I'm quoting Denver. Did you know the church had almost no use for the Book of Mormon until Hugh Nibley's efforts? You know that if you've read 18 verses. Hugh Nibley's efforts, beginning in the 1950s, practically discovered the Book of Mormon for the church. He's gone now. Even though Moses was taken from ancient Israel, and with him the authority of the priesthood, the ancient Israelites remained the Lord's, my screen is blocked. Let me see if can I do that? Yeah, oh, good. Okay, the Lord's people. He still worked through them and sent them messengers from time to time. These messengers were rarely the high priest. Their qualifications were private, as the Lord told Moses they would be. I have no doubt Hugh Nibley was sent to us. If you've paid close attention, his departure has created an intellectual collapse at the center of the faith, with various egos contending to be noticed. They aspire to put upon them Hugh Nibley's mantle. They are not made of the same stuff, called with the same calling, nor endowed with the same capacities. Wait.
Adrian, I've listened to some of his talks and watched some videos of his addresses to BYU. And if he lived now, he would be excommunicated for some of the things that he said Hugh Nibley would be.
The only reason he wasn't before is because he knew too much and they were scared of him.
Yeah, but if it was now and he said the same things, they would not tolerate it. I mean, he had no use. He had no use for scholars just because they got a degree. And the things that he said, just because you go to BYU and you go out with a piece of paper doesn't make you a saint.
Yeah, he didn't have a lot of use for the leadership either. But here's Denver again. I doubt we'll see someone like him again. Does this sound familiar? Perhaps we may someday see someone with an equally important message. But among those born in Brakhill, in this dispensation, there is none to compare to Brother Nibley. That's the tribute that Denver wrote to Hugh Winder Nibley. And so I think that there may be a double meaning there with Wendy. And then here's the statement. A man of his stature, prominence, and generosity just does not occur in the same place twice. So then Olivia Canfield at the end is and always will be Brakhill's greatest citizen, a person of her stature who has influenced so many lives for the good just does not occur in the same place twice. Today, without any doubt, Olivia is the greatest citizen ever produced by our state. So I just wanted to point that out about Nibley, just as an aside, just as a potential layer. So we're on page 82, and we're closing in on finishing this thing. Any other comments, though, before we get back into it?
Has anybody ever thought that another part of that could be Joseph Smith and how he got left behind and how he gave birth to the Restoration, gave it birth, and it kind of just faded away. You know, a lot of what we're talking about, Olive, I see Joseph Smith did. I mean, he was called. He did a lot of the work. He changed people's lives. But yet so much of that just faded, and it had nothing to do with Brakhill anymore.
I think I see Joseph Smith represented in Olivia Canfield, who left a legacy of works and truth that endures forever, versus Brigham Young, who left a legacy of buildings and built a city and, you know, a lot of physical accomplishments, but theologically was a disaster.
Exactly.
I think that's the contrast I see. Yeah, good point.
It's interesting what Donald says about the old Brigham Young Academy in Provo. All those things mentioned happened there before they built it. The Provo City Library.
Oh, I remember that thing was spooky, and it was abandoned, and people would sneak in. Yeah, when I was at BYU, it was, and yeah, now it is the Provo City Library. It's a good point. All right, the teenager problem was bad enough. The city council considered tearing the millennial problem. The city council considered tearing the old city hall down. However, the cost of doing so was high enough. The city never approved the project. It was a godsend to the community when the state legislature decided to build a museum for all of the Canfield's works. They eagerly donated the old city hall site for the new structure. This would eliminate one problem while providing a blessing to the community. All right, so if you are the council in heaven and you see what's going on and what has been done with the leaky relic of Joseph Smith's church, and you decide that it's still there and we can't do anything with it, we can't fix it, it's permanently broken and it's in the way and encumbering the ground, great shall be the fall thereof. It's a godsend when, wait, we can tear it down and use the foundations of it to build something permanent, lasting, and important to benefit the community, the family of God.
Adrian, you last conference, President Nelson said it was not definitely, that it was not Joseph Smith Church, it was Jesus Christ's church. And the way he said it, the Spirit was just telling me what he was saying was it was his, President Nelson's church, and he was now in charge. And that's what the Spirit told me that he was actually saying. And usually I take things at face value when somebody says something, but the Spirit was saying that's not what he meant.
Good point. Yeah. Well, and it's clear that the Lord has left that building a long time ago and doesn't claim it as his. So the next two paragraphs, well, the next paragraph is a quote of the previous one. News of the project spread, Cody Sheridan, newspapers, and on the internet, it says. So that puts this in our day, this is important, it was expected that the official dedication would be attended by a much larger audience. They were not disappointed. 4th of July, that's interesting because it's set on an anniversary. The dedication of the temple, whenever that is, I'm quite certain will be set on a date that's an important anniversary of something. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's an anniversary of something having to do with the ministry of David. And we could sit and geek out about the calendar for the next hour, but we won't. School teachers, this is interesting now about who attended, rather than simply the reporters. School teachers who used Olive E. Canfield's books came by the dozens from around the state. Who are the school teachers that come to the dedication of Olive E. Canfield's museum?
Missionaries, people who have learned the truth and teach it to others.
How about
Came here to prove.
those who came here on rescue mission? How about the Elohim? How about past prophets? Who do you think would come to the dedication of the temple at New Jerusalem? Who do you think will come?
Okay.
So, school teachers who used all of these Canfield's books came by the dozens. That's interesting. Angelic ministrants, I certainly expect.
It's interesting that he uses dozens.
Yeah, not thousands.
Yeah.
Newspapers from all over the nation had reporters there, and photographs of the new museum were seen nationally. That will be interesting to be seen. But if the nation doesn't refer to the United States, if, teachers from all over the state came, are we talking about from all over the creation, from all over the universe? I don't know.
Well, in the word.
And I also think that when they talk about school teachers, he further defines the school teachers that use these stories. They are the ones that came from all around the state, meaning they came from all over the place. And I keep seeing these by the dozens, and that still seems to refer to those 12 tribes of Israel, but the zodiacal constellations, people who are wise men. I remember having a conversation with a guy in priesthood meeting. I felt impressed upon to go to class, and they were talking about how they had the fullness, and we understand that the principle of the fullness, and we have the fullness, and if they're going to have anything to do with the fullness, they have to be like us. And I said, so let me ask you this much: where are your star stories? And they said, well, you have the 3 wise men. And I said, yeah. And what made them wise? Was it the fact that they brought gifts, or was it something else? And he says, well, it was because they followed the stars. And I says, I think that's pretty an interesting fact, that you call yourself the fullness, but yet you have no star stories. And I said, in our cultures, we have remnants, and I know our cultural stories are not accurate, but they are star stories there. And these are stories that are reflected up into the heavens, and they're called our fathers, and they represent certain things as symbol to our people. And you claim you have the fullness, but yet you have no wise men. And I find that really interesting in several cases. In this story itself, it keeps on bringing up these stories associated with Olivia Canfield's books, and then dozens and 12 books and stories passed down, and all of the adults, all of the children, they love these stories. I think that there's more there.
Rob, I think you make a beautiful point. And I love what you said about the zodiac, the 12 constellations of the zodiac, which in the precession of the equinoxes, you have 26,000 years or one creative cycle, one, where you go through all of the 12, and each one of the 12 tells you something about the life of Christ, Denver said. And so each one of those books tells you something about Wendy. But we don't know how to read those stories anymore, do we? And part of the reason we need the museum is to teach us those stories again. Part of the reason we need the temple is to be an observatory so we can learn how to walk in his paths, because the paths of God are in the heavens. So I'm really glad you reminded us of that, Rob. And the dozens, yeah, I think that that's a great point. 12 tribes, 12 apostles, 12 zodiacal signs. There's something there.
And even further, these guys who were in attendance were school teachers. So what are they teaching except for those things up in the heavens? These are the teachers that have been gathered there.
And maybe for the purpose of coming to teach. I mean, the dedication is a bit of a story element, but will there be heavenly messengers? Will there be angelic ministrants in the temple to teach truth? Yeah, there will. Okay, so great point. Thank you. Any others before we?
Adrian, it's Jacqueline. I have one, and that is the fact of the people coming from the north, from the tribes, will be bringing their precious riches or their treasures or their holy scriptures for us to gain an understanding from.
Right. Yeah, excellent point. Their stories. They're Olive Canfield books.
I was just going to mention the word nation. Newspapers from all over the nation had reporters there. Just nation often refers to the house of Israel, also the 12 tribes, which will be gathered there. And, you know, that's part of what we're trying to do right now is this gathering. But when this temple is dedicated, then they will be there. And just like you said, Jacqueline, the tribes from the north coming.
You know, and I think that putting this together, what Jacqueline said, what Rob said, what Tasha said, we have the testament in the Book of Mormon going to another land. We have the testament in the New Testament of Christ, but we call those the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph. We have essentially 2 out of the 10, or 2 out of the 12, excuse me. That would indicate that there are 10 more. And when Christ went to visit his other sheep, where they still remained in organized groups that he could go visit, and their testaments have been kept, and the 10 tribes returning from the north and bringing their precious treasures, their scriptures, the rest of all of these stories. That speaks to my heart anyway. Great insights, everybody. Thanks for putting that all together. All right, I think we're at the last paragraph. Though in time, there's time and there's eternity, and they're 2 different things. And so in time might have a double meaning there, because in time refers to when you are here in this mortality, versus in eternity you're not. And so from eternity to eternity is a mortal life, the beginning and the ending. Though in time, even the Olive Canfield Museum would require many repairs, it was her teachings of love for children which held life, not the building. And that's really the whole point, isn't it? As a result, repairs were faithfully made to keep pace with the increasing crowds of those interested in knowing more of the old woman who died in poverty and relative obscurity, but left a life's labor in her words and art. Love and wisdom outlast stone itself. And that's the point of a temple. Even the building will crumble it unless it has regular maintenance, which it will require, but that's not the point. The point is the truth. And it says the building will be expanded, ultimately to deal with the crowds who say, come and let us go up into the mountain of the Lord, and we'll learn of his ways, and he'll teach us of his ways, and we'll learn to walk in his paths. That will happen, and the nations will come. All nations shall flow unto it, it says in Isaiah. But it's the truth that resides there that will endure forever, and that's what matters. Go ahead, Phil.
It strikes me that if we are comparing, all of the to Mother in Heaven, that this house is, I mean, we call it the Lord's house. Family, Lord's family, Mother's family. It's just amazing to me that what endures is that of those relationships of family, which are knit together by the truth, are knit together by what they are, love and wisdom.
Yeah, beautiful. And so it's the teachings and love that held life. Yeah, by what they are. Does anyone else want to share something? Go ahead.
Back to page 68 on the bottom, when it says fame for those who provide insights always increases over time. That reminds me about the wine, how the wine gets better at the end of the wedding ceremony, better than the beginning and at that first miracle. But then I really like the next sentence where he says that ideas last forever. Yesterday, my wife, she's good friends with these twins, and they come from the family, the Red Gun family. And we went in and took some birthday gifts over there, and the typical concept is you go there and you talk story a little bit, you tell stories between one another. And with COVID-19 and all this business, everybody's been kind of hesitant, and now they're kind of over it. And so we sat on their porch and gave each other hugs and things like that. And I found what was just said, what Phil just said about love and wisdom. I had an experience with my daughter. I just found out she's leaving me this Thursday, and that's a surprise for me. And so I started getting really ticked off at her. I don't know, just all of a sudden I started snapping at her, and it's like, you're not doing this and you're not doing that, and you're not good enough here, you're not good enough there. And I remembered the principle that was taught about love and fear, the two emotions. And I had to confess to my daughter. I told her that I'm sorry because I found out that I was afraid, and my condition for being afraid, the way that I express my being afraid is not to be exposed, but to get angry, because angry is a manly way to be afraid, right? And I explained that to her. I says, I'm simply afraid, and I'm a scared man, and the reason why I'm scared is because I'm gonna miss you. And I'm explaining this to my friend, and the emotions are real, and she had just experienced her son leaving, and we were talking about the two emotions of love and fear. It reminded me of these ideas. They cross borders, and I don't have to say Book of Mormon, I don't have to say scriptural references, because they understood love and fear, and for the first time they understood their fear by way of their anger, and they didn't know that was fear. And I says, I've learned recently that love is generative. It grows, and fear clinches down and hardens. And so anytime you feel that hardness of that heart, or the hardness feeling that causes you anger or responding negatively or closing down, you know that that's a fear issue. And I was explaining them how generative is abundant, and you want to share and you want to enjoy. Well, it crossed over so well. He is one of the leaders of our sacred societies on the reservation, and he was talking to me about love and about fear, and it reminded me of that part there, that the idea will even outlast the temple itself. The concepts, the stories will outlast all of it, and it goes back to what Denver was saying this past Hurricane conference, when he was talking about looking at the byproduct, and when you start to aim at the byproduct, you always start to look at the building, and you look at the final result, or trying to get my friend into the waters of baptism. That's a byproduct. It's supposed to happen if it's supposed to happen. But the thing about it is the idea that crosses over. It's my belief that everyone that came here to earth came in support of Jesus Christ. And what we haven't done is give sufficient justification to understand how that relates to them right now, to trigger it so that they act more than the obstacle stopping them. And I find that the principles being spoken about here is that if we have to have peace among even us, I mean, given all of our history, to have peace among us, it's fleeting. And we can reduce our circles down until the point in which we can say this is peace, but all you've done was contracted and contracted and contracted into a smaller and smaller thing, and that's a indicator. It's indicative of fear. Whereas increasing and increasing and increasing, that becomes indicative of love. And so in the instance in which if everyone here came from Christ, came in support of Jesus Christ, our Savior, which I believe truly to be the case, then why don't they act that way? And I think that it's because there's missing information that allows us to overcome the obstacle. And when you have the reasons that overcome the obstacle, man, I'm sorry, you can overcome it all. And you can get along with anybody, because the knowledge is what allows the peace to happen. And so I really like this opportunity to talk with you guys. Thank you.
Great insights, Rob. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share before we finish? Okay, we're back over to you, Cameron. Do you have the remote? Mute that one. And
thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Hold on.
There we go. Thank you, Adrian, for preparing and presenting this. It's for me, it was drinking from a fire hose, and it's always wonderful. I really appreciate the preparation, and yeah, giving me a lot to think about. So thanks for that. We'll go ahead and close. Reminder for next week. The plan is Friday evening. McKay's going to be leading that discussion. I haven't heard that there's any change in schedule there. McKay, we on for Friday night?
Yes.
Very good. Looking forward to it. It's going to be Chapter 9, the Great Competition. And
yeah, we're gonna do it a little differently than we've done before.
Awesome. Tell us about it.
We're gonna look at the scriptural details of the plan of salvation, and we'll use the parable as a cue. Points of that story relate to the plan of salvation, and so we'll just kind of look through the points and go through the plan. And there's some surprises.
There usually are. Very good. Thanks, everybody, for joining the discussion.